Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the monthly roundtable discussion organized by the Council for Strategic Affairs. My name is Dr. Adityanjee, and I'm the President of Council for Strategic Affairs. We shall be having my PowerPoint run along with this. Let's start with the PowerPoint. So that's actually our logo. Let's move on to the next one. Next slide, please. So those of you who registered using our flyer, this is the flyer that shows you the topic relevance of the G20 summit with 3 distinguished panelists. Let's move on to the next slide, please. As I said, today is Saturday, December 6, 2025. It is 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. It is 8:30 p.m. Indian Standard Time. And we had 3 distinguished panelists, Mr. Sanusha Naidu from South Africa, Professor Chisom Ubabukoh. He's actually representing 2 things. One is the nation of Nigeria, where he hails from, and for last 4 years he's working in India. And lastly, we have Ambassador Rajiv Bhatia from India. Let's move on to the next slide, please. Now this slide tells you, previous one, please. The countries that are part of G20. It is a, very wide participation, but it is just a pictorial depiction in the globe how many countries are part of the G20, and we shall discuss this further. Next slide, please. And of course, this is from Johannesburg 2025 summit, some of the leaders having a photo op. Next slide, please. A little bit about Council for Strategic Affairs. CSA imparts education in the field of international relations. We foster discussion, dialogue, and debate on geopolitical issues. Council encourages strategic studies in general to raise the level of awareness. CSA condemns terrorism in all its forms worldwide. We aim to contribute towards world peace and prosperity. CSA promotes people-to-people contact and track to diplomacy. We would encourage our followers to please subscribe, like, and share the CSA YouTube channel. We are registered in United States as a 501c3 organization with the IRS. So those of the audience members who are based in US, we request you to support financially and donate to CSA. The link for PayPal donation is on our website. Next slide, please. So we have a monthly roundtable discussion, usually on second or first Saturday of each month at 10 a.m. Eastern Daytime. A monthly distinguished lecture by a domain expert, usually on third or fourth Saturday of each month. A one-on-one interview feature called Strategically Speaking with Dr. Adityanjee. We organize symposia, meetings, and conferences. We promote publications of articles on geopolitics and related subjects on our website. We do have a fellowship training program, and our current fellow is Harsh Sinha, and we had 3 new fellows join from 15th of November. They were Shubhi Malhotra, Vrinda Rastogi, and Guncha Shandilya. These 3 fellows have joined very recently. Again, we are registered with IRS as a 501c3 organization, so kindly support us. Next slide, please. That's the picture of Sanusha, who has not joined and will not be joining for certain reasons. So let's move on to next panelist, please. This is Professor Chisom Ubabukoh. Next one, please. Professor Ubabukoh is an associate professor of economics at Jindal Global Law School of the O.P. Jindal Global University, who obtained his bachelor's degree from Federal University of Technology in Nigeria an MSc in Developmental Economics and Policy with distinction, and a PhD in Economics from the University of Manchester in UK. Prior to teaching at Jindal University, he lectured for many years in economics departments of University of Manchester, Manchester Metropolitan University, as well as the Global Development Institute in UK. He also has broad industry experience, including stints with Nigeria's Federal Ministry of Agriculture and the International Food Policy Research Institute. He has consulted with various developmental organizations, both in UK as well as in Africa, as well as at World Bank. He has published several well-received papers in influential journals. Let's move on to the next slide, please. And that's a picture of Ambassador Rajiv Bhatia, who you see on the screen. Let's move on. He is a distinguished fellow, Foreign Policy Studies Program at Gateway House. He is a member of CII, International Advisory Council, Trade Council, Africa Committee. His actually resume is voluminous. So in interest of time, I'm not going to read verbatim everything. He has expertise in Indo-Pacific, Africa. He is a prolific writer and has been well published. And you see him on media, whether it is TV programs, national, international channels, he's everywhere. So we are very honored to have him on our platform. Next slide, please. So this was the picture of welcome to G20 in South Africa in Johannesburg 2025 in November. Next slide, please. And of course, a group picture which shows various world leaders with conspicuous absence of one world leader who represents a country that was founding member of the G20. Actually, to my mind, G20 is now a misnomer. It should be called G21 because when it was founded in 1999, there were 19 sovereign countries, an international organization called EU. And in 2023, African Union was also invited to join as a full-fledged member. So it's no longer G20. Technically, it is G21, but old habits die hard and people are resistant to change. So it's still called G20, but the exact terminologically, it should be G21. So in G20 summit in 2025, in a break from the tradition, leaders adopted the final declaration actually at the onset of first 2 days of the meetings in Johannesburg, with US absent from the talks. The 30-page declaration congratulates South Africa for initiating a review of the work done by the G20 to date and embraces Africa's voice within the group of G20. After adopting the declaration upfront, the leaders turned their attention to delivering their country's statements. European leaders seized on the sidelines of the summit, discussed, developments coming from US peace plan from Ukraine. The joint statement mentions the Ukraine war only once. Despite broad consensus in the G20 declaration, on certain grounds, Argentina indicated that it was not in agreement with that. Let's move on to the next slide, please. The declaration has reaffirmed the call for more equitable financing for Africa and the need to accelerate the response to climate change on the continent. Despite a threat from the US for South Africa not to adopt the declaration in its absence, the spokesman of South African presidency said that this argument did not hold water. Multilateralism is the biggest winner today. Global cooperation is the biggest winner today. Obviously, for South Africa, it is an enormous success that we have managed to secure agreement from all countries barring the US. Of course, the US is not pleased. There was some drama about handing over the gavel to the next presidency, and there were harsh words expressed openly. by certain personalities. Next slide, please. That shows actually President Trump and President Cyril Ramaphosa. Next slide, please. So those are the housekeeping rules before we go on to the discussion. My request to all the audience members is, keep yourself mute to avoid noise interference. Change your cell phone setting to vibration mode. Please don't try to interrupt our distinguished panelists. Only those members of the audience who identify themselves openly will be allowed to ask questions. No anonymous questions, please. All the questions are moderated through the chat room, so please send very specific questions. Don't write lengthy comments in the chat room because they are not welcome. The program is being recorded. It is also being live streamed on our YouTube channel. So certain people are watching on the YouTube channel. And finally, once again, CSA is registered as a 501c3 organization with the IRS in the United States. So US-based audience, kindly support us financially to help us keep organizing these programs. With that introduction, I'm going to invite our tentatively second speaker, but in today's presentation, the first panelist, Professor Ubabukoh. Sir, kindly unmute yourself. The platform is yours. You will be making a 7 minutes opening statement. And after both the panelists have spoken, we will have questions and answers. So, Professor Ubabukoh.
All right. Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be part of this panel. I want to make special thanks to Dr. Adityanjee and the Council for Strategic Affairs for inviting me to the important conversation. Really, it's an honor also to join Ambassador Bhatia, whose work has been very influential in the field of international affairs. Okay, so the G20 is really, at inception, it was made to be an economic discussion forum, like a consultative forum. But really, it has evolved in some way to be kind of like a central steering committee, where now we are discussing many issues that have to do with global governance, right? Economists have this term they call polycrisis, where there are many things happening at the same time, and you're trying to juggle all the balls in the air at the same time, and it's not really easy to keep it straight. So we need like an organization that will try to come and kind of manage all the little micro crises happening here and there, economic shocks, geopolitical fragmentation, even though it's not really supposed to make geopolitical comments, but from time to time, it does make a couple of comments in that direction also. I remember in India's presidency where there was the war happening between Russia and Ukraine, and India was, the G20 presidency, the statement, they condemned war in all forms, they condemned fighting, but they didn't name any names, they didn't put blame on anybody. But it's we are now dealing with climate stress, widening inequality, all kinds of different issues. Well, the question today is the G20 relevant? What is the relevance of the G20? I think it really shouldn't be, is it relevant? But how can it remain effective? How can it really maintain a sharp edge in the shifting global landscape? So the G20 is a really important organization. First of all, we have to establish its accounts for about 80% or 85% of the world's GDP, maybe about 75, 80% of the global trade. Population also, almost 2/3 or more, adding with Africa's 1.3, 1.4 billion people. It's now, it's a really massive part of the world. And of course, very importantly, the G20 members make up about 80% of all the emissions, the CO2 emissions in the world. So it's like, this, if there's anybody that is going to be able to tackle these issues, it has to be this one. These are the days of international cooperation, going side by side with international competition also. So it's a very interesting thing. Collective action, we all recognize, is important in the world today. Is dominating the era, right? From COVID times, there was a need for us to galvanize global action. towards a particular perspective. Pandemic recovery, inflation crisis, debt crisis that's happening now, food insecurity, and now AI governance. These are all things that have to have a global kind of action for us to be able to know the direction we're going. I remember a couple of years ago, also cryptocurrency regulation was a really big deal. We were trying to think of how should the world deal with this crisis. Now AI is kind of on the front burner, and this is also there. G20, I think, is the only forum that legitimately is able to bridge this North power and South power, like to bridge this gap. Because the United Nations is a very big organization that is too large to do the job. The G7 also is too narrow. I mean, of course, they were starting with the G7, but they realized very quickly that they were not going to be able to solve the problems without bringing in the South, the global South, into the conversation. So the G20 kind of fills that sweet spot between global ambition and institutional delivery. I think also very importantly, the African Union's inclusion as a member of the G20 was a complete game changer, and we have India to thank for this. Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi did an amazing thing when he gave his word that Africa will be included in the next conversation, and yes, it happened. I think this particular G20 presidency that just happened in Johannesburg has been pretty significant, because it's the first time that this presidency has been held in Africa, and it's like it's a accumulation of all the the hostings that has been done, or the presidency that has been held by the global South, from Indonesia, Bali, to India, to Brazil, and then South Africa, before it goes back to the north. So it's a really kind of significant one. I think Africa's inclusion is pretty important, not just because or as a symbolic thing, but because we have, it's so important to have Africa on the table when issues are being discussed. So there are many things that Africa suffers disproportionately from, problems that are not caused within the continent itself. So, for example, when there are commodity shocks, or when some war happens somewhere in the ends of the world, Africa is the one that kind of tends to bear the brunt of this a lot of times. Look at the climate crisis. Africa is the lowest, footprint in terms of CO2 emissions, but we are bearing like a huge part of the burden. So if you want to discuss these issues, it doesn't really make much sense to not have Africa on the table. And I think the issues that have been raised in this particular presidency are really important. For example, the debt restructuring thing. Many countries are in huge debt, are in debt crisis also, crisis of the possibility of going into more debt. And here we're trying to bring a lot of attention to this problem, because if nothing is done, it could be a really, really big issue. I mean, tons of countries, Argentina, Ecuador, Venezuela, African countries, Zambia, Zimbabwe, Ethiopia, Sudan. Many countries are in huge crisis and are at the precipice of of going under. Some countries have even defaulted. This, thinking about IMF, how IMF should think about the credit system and restructuring of debts. I think that particular conversation that happened this year is pretty important. Going forward in the future, just as I conclude, I think that the presidency going to the US is good, but we have to also have a conversation about why they were not part of the last one, because it gives a lot of, it kind of brings down, it looks as if, okay, the world is not united anymore, that there are these, issues. The US was put a lot of pressure on the other members to not accept the resolutions that we were going to make. And, there's been a lot of hostility. US also said they were not going to invite. A couple of days ago, I saw the news. They said Trump was saying he was not going to invite South Africa to the next one. I'm like, this is a little bit ridiculous now. So we have to, I think, going forward, we have to come together. The world has to come together. There are just too many issues that cannot be solved individually. I think cooperation is the language that we have to have. Now we have to pull together. In the future, I think G20 will continue to be relevant. It will need reform, I think, some reform, but it will still be always relevant. Just the same way as the United Nations also, I think, needs some reform. There's a Security Council that always votes on issues, but then they have one or two countries that will always use their veto power to change whatever resolution has been made, and then it looks as if there is no result. Like, what are you doing? You make a resolution, and then even the ones that everybody agrees to, nobody does anything about. So it needs some reform. The G20, I think, also needs, and it's shown that it can be reformed. A couple of years ago when India hosted the G20 presidency, and they brought this reform, bringing the AU in. It's an example of how this can be done. I think more of this needs to be done going forward. I think this is my time. Thank you very much for the opportunity to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Professor Ubabukoh. You really hit the nail on its head. And I like your characterization that it's not issue of relevance, but effectiveness. So thank you very much. Now it's my honor and pleasure to invite Ambassador Rajiv Bhatia to make his opening statement. Sir,
thank you very
platform is yours.
much. Thank you. Can you hear me? Yeah, thank you very much. Good evening, dear viewers, fellow panelists, and of course the chair. I'm most grateful to Dr. Adityanjee and CSA for this very important invitation on a subject which is very relevant, and it does have global interest. So through this very unique medium, I'm very happy that I would be able to reflect on the topic of this month and this evening in particular. The topic has been worded precisely: relevance of G20 summit. And by implication, therefore, obviously, we need to reflect on the relevance of G20 itself. We are doing so in the context of the latest summit or the recent summits as well. In this time allotted to me, I would like to make 4 or 5 broad points, and then if opportunity arises, we can elaborate some of them later. My first point is that this present decade, the decade of 2020s, is proving to be very much the age of polycrisis. The decade opened on COVID pandemic. It has then seen a major war in Europe, which continues to go on. It was followed by the conflict in Gaza, which then triggered multiple other conflicts in the region. And then, of course, there have been serious economic challenges that the world faces today. And on top of that, the traditional rivalry between the US and China continues to be intensified in some form or the other. And as a result, the basic question that comes up is, can 193 countries resolve the world's problems purely through bilateral means? Or do they need a regional fora? Do they need a global fora? And it is very much my conviction that especially in this age of polycrisis, we need more, not less, of multilateralism. And especially because this is also the age of growing multipolarity. Multipolarity demands multilateralism, and we need multilateralism of the 21st century. The UN unfortunately reflects the multilateralism of 20th century. Until and unless it is reformed and updated, we have to bank on an institution like G20, which truly represents the realities of the current century. It is not a formal body. It is not a treaty organization. It's an informal body. It doesn't have a secretariat, but has it functioned well in the past decade and a half or more? That is a question that we need to debate. My second point is the trajectory of G20 also needs to be taken into account. It all began in 1999 at the level of the finance ministers. Then in 2008, it got elevated to the level of the head of state and government. It was for the first time in 2023, its first expansion took place when the African Union was accepted as the full member. And finally, the most important thing was that from 22 to 25, presidencies were consecutively provided by the countries of the Global South. So if we take into account these factors, we come to the conclusion that a forum which is a combination of the emerging and developing economies has shown consistently strong interest in the priorities and concerns of the Global South. But in my view, this has not been done at the expense of the interests of the North, and that is the wisdom and resilience of G20. One quick question as to how credible it is, namely, it takes decisions and makes declarations. Are they getting implemented? Now, that is a question we should also discuss, because it started as a discussion body. It did not start as a decision-making body, even though many of us like to see it function as the Economic Security Council. It, in fact, is not Economic Security Council. It is a gathering of major leaders of the world who have to find a way to develop consensus on the challenges of the world. My third point quickly is about Johannesburg Summit, and my task has been made simple by the chair and by Professor Chisom by pointing out some of the features of the Johannesburg Summit. I think there is a clash of narratives here. The host country, South Africa, has put forward the idea that it was a successful summit. It was a historic summit because it was happening for the first time on the African continent. And it tried to combine the concerns and interests of both sides, the North and the South. And even though it was probably the least attended summit, a calculation shows that only 67% of the leaders attended it. That means countries such as the US, Argentina, Mexico, Russia, China, and Indonesia, they were not represented at the highest political level. It was also pointed out that at 11,000 words, it was actually producing a declaration smaller than the average declaration, which is about 12,000 words. It also came up with a whole lot of commitments, which is probably number-wise smaller than the other conferences, but that's okay. We can go into all that later. The other narrative, as we know, has been that it was rather one-sided, and there were several grievances of the US government, not only about South Africa's domestic policies, but about its handling of G20. And therefore, obviously, what followed Johannesburg Summit is now very well known to us and was captured very well by the term drama by our chair today. My final point is that at this time, when G20 is standing at an inflection point, do we, objective observers, analysts, and experts, do we have some advice? Do we have some recommendations for those who run G20? And if so, what is that recommendation? Is it possible for us to feel genuinely concerned that the immediate future of G20 could be shrouded in uncertainty because certain decisions have been taken? Or is it that pragmatism would demand that whatever is happening may be accepted completely in the hope that things might begin to change a year later. So that question as to what is the role of objective analysts of G20, people who are historians, people who are teachers, people who are former diplomats, are they in a position to make some suggestions at the end of it all? Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much indeed, Ambassador Bhatia, for your very succinct and lucid points, on various issues, and you have made things very easy for our audience members to focus on. I see that right now there are no questions in the chat room from the audience members, so I will start with the questions to both the panelists. My first question goes to Professor Ubabukoh. Professor Ubabukoh, you started very well by recapitulating the history of the G20, that it started in 1999 as basically an economic/financial deliberative body and subsequently got elevated to the head of state level, and then other things started to creep in. Now, one of the critique of the Johannesburg summit was that, Ukraine war was mentioned only once in this particular summit. Now, you raised the issue how to make this G20 summit more effective in future. Does the reform mean going back to the basics? If your mandate becomes too broad, you become totally ineffective. It started as an economic and financial deliberative body for the international community. And by actually elevating it to head of state level, it brought the geopolitical drama that we are witnessing. Should it go back to just finance minister level and not involve geopolitical issues like war in Gaza or tribal war in Europe, that even the United Nations Security Council that is designated with that responsibility has not been able to do so? So the original mandate of G20 has been diluted. Would the reform in future aim at bringing it back to the basics? What are your thoughts on that?
Okay, thank you so much for that question. For that question. Right. I mean, I have a personal view, my personal opinion about this. I think the G20 cannot really go back to its original kind of formulation. That's my personal view. And the reasons for that is because a lot of times the crises that we face in the world now, they are interrelated. So economics really cannot be isolated in the way that it had been done in the past. Okay, so for example, if there's a war somewhere, it's going to affect the economy of countries elsewhere. And I think a lot of people have the idea that G20 probably should return to an economics-only platform because there will be a lot of disagreement on geopolitics, and this will tend to paralyze negotiations. So you're trying to, have a communique, and then there will be a lot of divergent opinions and views. And some people might think, oh, it's too broad of an agenda, and it would dilute the effectiveness. But I do think that there is some middle ground, that the G20 should not return to the narrow technocratic, very specific mandate that the world has gone to. But it should streamline the agenda to issues where any of these other side issues should be dovetailed towards the economic thing. So I mean, for example, climate change. It's not a purely economic thing, but it should be discussed within the purview of the economy specifically. And this way, you will be able to remove some of those distractions, those things that will cause. This is my personal view on how I think it should move forward. I think things like food security, digital governance, inclusive growth, all these things, they are not directly economic per se, but they are all relevant because everything is economic these days. I mean, everything has a tie-in. So I think every major economic risk today is geopolitical, and every geopolitical risk in turn has economic spillovers. And so the G20 sits at that intersection where it cannot really afford to retreat completely, but also it has to be careful not to color outside the lines and to make sure that everything is done in a way that everybody understands that this is fair. You're not taking sides, you're not doing anything trying to subvert the the sovereignty of another nation. But the whole objective is you want the progress of every member of the G20 and the rest of the world for that matter. So I think it's a fine line that has to be threaded, but this is my view. I think G20 is the only organization that will be able to practically tread this thread through the needle. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Ubabukoh. Very valid, comments and your personal opinion. I think you are perfectly right in saying that it probably cannot go back to the original mandate. There has to be some semblance of balance. My question to Ambassador Bhatia is, how do we go from here over next 12 months? Generally, the norm or protocol is that 3 heads of states, the previous summit, the host country, and the future host, they liaise and collaborate among themselves so that the agenda is carried out. We are facing a very unique situation that the next host country, which is supposed to have taken over, is saying that the previous host country will not be invited. The agenda or the declaration that was approved will not be honored, and invitation to certain countries that are not part of G20 will not be there. One of the specific critique was that more than 100 countries had gathered there, and that was not welcomed by one particular country that is going to host the summit in 2026. So how do you envisage? Will there be a collaborative model, or we are, writing an obituary of the collaborative model for at least the next 12 months? Ambassador Bhatia,
Thank you
please.
very much. This is the million-dollar question regarding the immediate future of G20. I think certain facts have become very clear. The US has already made it clear formally more than once that it was not going to invite South Africa. Already they have scheduled the first meeting of the G20 Sherpas on, I think, 15th and 16th December. And the invitation has not gone to the Sherpa of South Africa. And South Africa has already said that it will not be lobbying other countries. It would only keep extending its hand through mutual respect for dialogue with the US, but would leave it at that. The president has said he was not going to lobby any country at all. So here we can look for answers in terms of pointing out that the president of the G20 has enormous authority and influence. But does it have the authority and influence to take decisions on behalf of G20 without consultation and consensus? That is the question that needs to be answered by the members of G20. Because when G20 was established in 1999 and when they went on to the head of state level, that was all done through consultation and consensus. Even now, as late as 2023, when a new member was added, it was not done by the president. It was done through complete consensus, and only when everybody was on board, the African Union was invited. So the principle is consultation and consensus, and that probably is what is required. But the central focus has to be on what the members are going to do and what exactly they're planning to do. For example, the most difficult question, what is the African Union going to do? Are they going to attend the Sherpa's meeting? Also, it's important to note as to what the global south countries will do. Brazil, India, China, and Russia. Are they going to attend? Or are they going to make a request? Or maybe Are they going to attend and then make an attempt there to see that the normal functioning of the G20 restored? Frankly, these are the questions which are still in the womb of the future. But I can share with you that there is some clues available for the thinking and conceptualization by two important members of G20, and they are India and Russia. This matter was discussed between Prime Minister Modi and President Putin. And obviously, true to a very fine diplomatic line, they have included a paragraph, para 44, in their joint statement, where they have first of all asserted that G20 remains the premier international economic forum that provides a platform for dialogue between the emerging and developing economies. And then the point that it makes is that this forum acts on the basis of equal and mutually beneficial footing. And finally, it goes on to say that the two countries recognize the importance of continued and productive functioning of the G20 based on consensus and focusing on its key mandate. So you can see the attempt here is to provide sufficient scope, sufficient elbow room for a possible way out. Now, whether the member countries do something before 15th December or at the 15th December or 15th December meeting itself, we will have to wait and see, because we are all outsiders. We are only students and scholars and experts. We are not the policy makers.
Thank you, Ambassador Bhatia. One cannot predict the future, but one hopes that the multilateral mechanisms that are currently under assault internationally survive this difficult situation for the betterment of the world. I have a question here from Mr. Harsh Sinha, who is a training fellow at the CSA. And I'm going to read this question. Given the expanding mandate and expectation from G20 in addressing global economic stability, conflict resolution, climate transition, and developmental equity, whether there is a strategic necessity to establish a permanent G20 secretariat to institutionalize continuity and ensure timely implementation of commitments and avoid conflicts. If yes, what could be possible structure should it adopt? And both of you can opine on this.
Let the professor go first.
Okay.
Okay, thank you so much. Well, my view on this is, I think, yes, I think probably a permanent secretariat is strategically necessary. That is my view. I believe that annual presidencies will create policy churn, but commitments too often they will stall. They will not be followed through after a summit. And I think this G20 thing has gone beyond just like an annual summit meeting club, come and have a discussion and then go. There needs to be like a framework where those resolutions or those communiques can be followed up upon. So I think a secretariat, would probably not be a bad idea. The problem is it's going to be quite difficult to work out the modalities of how that will be. Where is it going to be headquartered, for example? Should it be done somewhere in the north or in the global south? Of course, there's the Troika, which is the past presidency, the current one, and the next one. They have to somehow be all involved in the administration of that. The director general for the secretariat has to be like a charter that everybody will agree to in terms of how it's going to operate. So there are many things to work out. I mean, if such a thing is going to be done, of course, there's also the idea of funding. How is it going to get funded? Is it going to be like a based on the GDP of the countries or what, so many different details. I think necessity is there, but it's probably beyond my personal expertise to figure out exactly how this would operate. But I think, in my view, I think it's probably a good idea. I mean, it can create, if there's a crisis response, early warning. It will be like a neutral convener, a technical hub, just a hub where people, all the different nations can come and get resources, spread information, and whatever. I mean, just to coordinate the affairs, probably a good idea. Yeah, my view.
Thank you, Professor Ubabukoh. Now let's hear from Ambassador Rajiv Bhatia.
Let me respectfully disagree with the dear professor. I think I would argue that there's really no necessity for a secretariat, and that secretariat will not particularly enhance the effectiveness of G20. When we talk about setting up a secretariat, we are trying to turn G20 into a formal body. Then we should not complain that it has gone away from its original mandate. The original mandate, both in 1999 and 2007, was for it to act as an informal body, and it did quite well. In fact, you remember the global financial crisis 2007 to 2009 was effectively handled by G20. And then later also some of the other things, trying to start off the compact with Africa, trying to also handle pandemic in some fashion, establishing the linkage between development and health and security. And also finally projecting the concerns of the global south. It was all done through the informal mechanism. It worked fairly well. What it faces today, namely, a public rift between two founding members, that is something so new that even a secretariat cannot or could not have handled it. And of course, Professor Chisom is right. If you were to decide on secretariat option, there are going to be so many divisive issues that the poor G20 may not be able to withstand, all those challenges. So I would strongly urge, it's a good question to raise, but it is also being raised, by the way, in BRICS, which has gone from 5 to 11 members. But again, I think there also the burden of opinion is that we will have to continue as it is. There are mechanisms. The two tracks are working quite nicely, the Sherpa track and the finance track. The heads of state and heads of government are the ones who have to contribute to the summit. And then the Troika, which is a very important mechanism, that also has to be allowed to work. So overall, I would say the real problem is not the absence of a secretariat. The real problem is a weak political will, which allows you to make ringing declarations, but which does not give you sufficient political muscle to go and start implementing some of those decisions. So instead of having a secretariat, let us, the third space, the NGO, bodies like CSA, work together to create that political imperative for our leaders, so that whatever they negotiate and announce, they have to bring that into decision making at the global level.
I think very well articulated. We have, similar kinds of, experience. Having a permanent secretariat becomes very contentious about location, about funding. We are already seeing defunding of some of the UN institutions. You don't want to chew more than you can bite, because similar behavior will be displayed if there were a permanent secretariat and there were funding obligations. Nobody wants to fund another international project. That is a major, major issue. So we have to use the model that is functioning at this point in time. But yes, from an academic perspective, this is a good question as to having a continuity and a permanent secretariat would be useful or not, let me go on to the next question. And this was highlighted by our distinguished panelists that the summit in Johannesburg was a historic summit, first time in Africa, first time AU's participation, and culmination over the almost 4 summits, Indonesia, India, Brazil, then South Africa. So pretty much there was emphasis on the issues that are very important for the global South. Now let's see, 2026 is going to be US, 2027 is going to be UK, and 2028 is going to be South Korea. And I don't consider South Korea as part of the global South, for various reasons I would not articulate here. Are we going to see a counter reaction from the global North to the priorities of global South in next 3 years, when the presidency of the summits is going to be under control of global North?
Great question. You really compel us to reflect. So I would begin by saying that, as I mentioned earlier, while the 4 presidencies were provided by countries of the global South, 2 from Asia, 1 from Latin America, 1 from Africa, very balanced, it was like IBSA plus Indonesia. So it was 4 countries which represented different regions. But the presidency was always working on the basis of Troika. And so, it had to work in a calibrated, measured manner, make sure that global North stays with you. And yes, there were 1 or 2 things which did strike me as well. For example, in the Indian presidency, a phrase was introduced that for climate change, the developing countries need not billions but trillions of dollars. It was a phrase which was then repeated in Brazil and I think in South Africa. This might not have gone down very well with the global North. In any case, they've had no intention to provide so much more money for the climate change, particularly by some of them who do not even believe in it. So there is that situation. I think in the current year, the current presidency, obviously, there are certain political and ideological views which will have to be taken into account. The host and the president, you just cannot ignore. It does have a strong influence on and a stamp on the kind of presidency that will emerge. So I think we should now give to ourselves a time span of 2 to 3 years. I think Dr. Adityanjee, you have pointed out quite well, instead of looking at G20 in 26, I think we should look at the 26-28 period. And I think it will find a natural equilibrium, especially if all the 3 summits are well attended at the highest political level. I think this is the significant thing, because it is the leaders' body. The declaration is the leaders' declaration. And I think it's very important for us to urge and ensure that every G20 country attends all the coming meetings at the head of state or government level.
Professor Ubabukoh, what are your views on this?
Thank you. I think the presidency of the G20 is really important. The host country, I think they set the agenda, they set the theme, they set the priority tracks, they set the ministerial agenda, the narrative framing, everything. It's basically put in the purview of the hosting country. So there is the risk that the conversation will kind of move. The last couple of years presidency, in terms of climate change particularly, there has been a lot of discussion on adaptation, just transition, climate finance, which are the things that the global South kind of likes. But by the time it goes to the north, you might start having a different conversation. You might start talking about, carbon pricing, hydrogen standards, decarbonization architecture, all kinds of other different things that you might think, okay, this may not be as immediately relevant. Okay, so I think that danger is definitely there, but I for sure believe that this shift will not be total. For example, the inclusion of the AU as a permanent member. They used to be invited all the time as just, somebody who comes in and, comes to observe, as it were, in quote. But, now as a permanent member, they have a seat on the table. They are also very big, important countries from the global south that are part of the G20. Brazil is really influential. Mexico, India is huge. Saudi Arabia, Turkey, South Africa, you cannot downplay any of these countries. They are going to definitely pull their own weight. And of course, there is the danger of the BRICS, plus block there, which people begin to think, okay, if you are not going to meet our needs, maybe we can shift our focus, our attention on something else. So I think in the grand scheme of things, the South will always be probably relevant, in terms of the framing, but it's basically depending on what how it turns out going. I do think that there will be a tendency for the North to want to try to drive the narrative, but the global South has enough representation at the highest levels to be able to still maintain this balance. And as Ambassador Bhatia had said, if there is full attendance, if everybody is committed to it, there is no reason why it cannot keep on being beneficial to every member of the G20. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Professor Ubabukoh. We do have one more question, but I'm going to skip it because we are running short of time. My heartfelt thanks to Professor Ubabukoh and Ambassador Rajiv Bhatia. My thanks to our audience members who took time off an hour on a weekend. But my heartfelt thanks to Team CSA, Mr. Ripudaman Pachori and Mr. Rajiv Verma. These are the two individuals who work behind the scenes to make these kind of discussions possible, technologically, arrangement-wise. So, heartfelt thanks to them. Again, as a way of announcement, this is being recorded. This has been live streamed. This would be available on our YouTube channel as a permanent resource. So, if people want to refer back to it, that is perfectly fine. I think we have to contemplate about future of the international relations and a collaborative model of the world. Will G20 become extinct like the League of Nations or get into suspended animation like SARC? These are relevant questions one has to ask because the positions that have been taken are very entrenched, and there's a little bit of, bitterness and lack of finesse and diplomacy in which the drama played out. It is very, very unfortunate, and my hope is that maybe that is just a transient period of 12 months, and after that everything comes back to normal. But let's hope that this important mechanism for international cooperation and for solving the problems of the world that have not been deliberated or been adequately addressed by either the UN or the Security Council, this is an important forum where everybody is present on the table. So let's hope that G20 has a good future and, wisdom prevails over petty behavior, and we are able to help the world solve the financial problems and other crises. Thank you very much indeed for our distinguished panelists.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Thank you. Good luck to you.
Thank
All
you.
the best.
Bye-bye.